Welcome back to another Medtech Snapshot, the medical device podcast where we do a one question, one answer discussion. Today I'm really excited because I get to feature my friend and colleague, Peman Montazemi, who is the founder and CEO of Finally Quiet. Peman also had the opportunity just this past week to head up to Bay Area and attend the 43rd annual JPMC Healthcare Conference. So as you listen in today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sorting through the conference. What were the takeaways? Where's the industry going? Technology, innovation, some funding discussions, and so forth. So stay tuned. Peman, glad to have you back.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, Travis. Very much appreciated. And hello, everyone.
Well, last week was a whirlwind. I've talked with a couple folks who went up to the JPMC conference. That was the 43rd Healthcare Conference. So I'm really excited to hear your perspective on, what were some of the big takeaways from this? Because I just got to imagine over the course of the, 3 or 4 days that conference is going on, the amount of discussions both in the conference as well as outside of the conference,
Right.
Covering everything from just themes for the year, technology, kind of where the industry is going, funding, and so forth. So, I'm just going to kind of lay it on you here and let you take it where you want to. So educate us on what your experience was.
The experience actually was very positive. We'll start with the vibe on the street, right? So the vibe on the street was very positive. It was a lot less grim, starting with the cab guys, Uber, Lyfts, hotel people, whatnot. They saw that it was a lot less grim than last year. People were very positive. There was a lot of movement. It was a very, enlightened, and literally everybody was so happy, to be there and everything, and a lot of love and care and support. It was an extremely supportive, conference, I would say. That was the number one thing. And then the number two is that from an expert perspective, I was very happy to report, like the one-liner, right? Experts are cautiously optimistic regarding the 2025 forecast for the medtech industry. And I'm so happy, to share that news. It looks very positive. And then we'll go and dive into the details of it.
So, as you look at kind of the future here in terms of the outlay for 2025, any thoughts or what were your takeaways from attending a couple of these different sessions there?
Yeah, the main takeaway was that, so of course, with the advance of the geopolitical and the impact of geopolitical policies, there's a change of, the Trump administration is starting on Monday. So with potential tariffs on medtech manufacturing, in Mexico and other countries, for instance, that could, disrupt supply chains and raise costs. So companies may need to diversify manufacturing locations and reshore production to mitigate risks. And then so it has been the trend, and it was very interesting because sometimes in the previous history of the Trump administration, you can wake up in the morning, a policy is in place already. And then so it can really take people by surprise. So those conversations with potentially having contract manufacturers here in the United States and whatnot should start now. And of course, we'll talk about the M&As and the deals and the sizing. The raise size should also be adjusted to compensate for these additional costs. And the allocation of the budget should be also, properly allocated.
I'm so glad you brought that piece up, between M&A and funding, because at least from my most humble purview, the last year and a half has been a little tough on that end. I've not seen very many new startups come to fruition, but there have been some big deals from an M&A perspective. Boston Scientific has snapped up a couple folks as of recent. The second day of 2025, you have the announcement of Stryker and Inari.
Yes.
What else did you hear? What were your takeaways from that perspective between M&A and the VC bit at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference?
Sure. Excellent question. So from an M&A trends, mergers and acquisitions overall in medtech towards the end of the year of 2024 did shift towards becoming a little smaller. Strategic deals were kind of between the $0.5 to $2.5 billion range. Of course, the Inari deal and also the Cerebell who did an exit, and then some shifting that we saw in the industry. The focus on filing, portfolio gaps, etc., in addition, and expanding capabilities and leveraging addition technologies through AI, etc., were really the highlights. When we saw this now, this was backed also by Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs was present, actually part of that specific, M&A talk and the KPIs, because they're really looking at two things. Number one is the number of M&As or IPOs, and they're looking at the volume of deals and the size of the deals. And then so here's what, really literally Goldman Sachs had to say is that the underlying fundamentals for the industry look very strong. And they didn't have the data computed for December of 2024 incorporated yet. But seeing basically the curvatures and change in curvatures for the end of 2024, basically this sets the tone for everyone to move into an offense mode. So it is set well for that. And that's literally Goldman Sachs talking. They also, mentioned about portfolio configuration continues to stay on top of mind. It is not a very trendy thing to do, but it is the right thing to do. And players also should ask themselves, are they playing in the right market? And then Goldman Sachs also sees that companies both are going to expand and also get smaller. So those are some of the trends that we saw on the M&A side. Deals are going to increase. The number of deals in 2025 is expected to grow. And something that I found actually quite innovative is that we're talking to Medtronic and Edward Life Sciences. They actually did two major things. One of them is that they actually went and acquired the assets of a subclass of products, not necessarily the entire company in some cases. In the case of Medtronic, they did 5 deals, and some of the 5 deals were very targeted. So they were very cost efficient and very targeted to, let's say, acquire a specific distribution or a product line, and they leave basically the rest of the company run on its own. And then the other thing that Edward Life Sciences raised, which is the last point, perhaps, on this specific topic that I have, which is they put a dedicated integration team so that after the acquisition, everything becomes very small. So they have 5-6 different staff members that are, doing IT, HR, legal, and of course, manufacturing operations, R&D and whatnot. And of course, gluing the clinical teams together. They have a team dedicated to that. And I believe that they did a fantastic job. This is a wonderful idea so that these acquisitions, you're not like, I was just chopped off from mainland and then I don't know what to do. They're there to support and then so that they marry the integration so that we have a very smooth landing, post M&A.
And hey, I mean, that's some of the things that I live on a daily basis. These integrations, especially when it's with a large strategic and an organization that's been commercial for quite some time. I mean, it takes a village. There are robust teams that are getting involved and, like you said, supply chain, shared services, but then manufacturing, engineering, and so forth. So I think you're spot on there. So we talked just a moment ago about trends. So were there any other trends that came up in the discussion last week that were not AI related? That's what I'm really curious about. So anything that came up that's on the device side of the industry, trends that we can look out for 2025?
So the major trends that we saw neuro and cardiac metabolic. Those two were all over the places. Neurological, devices, they were definitely, into GLP-1 and cardiometabolic. It was not necessarily just, Pfizer and Cetera, really on the biopharma side, but there's an impact of that directly under the medtech because there are products that are supported, there are accessories that are supported of these markets and these products. And then so those two were really, really big, on that. And the neurological devices for any kind of neurostimulation, any kind of, novel stimulation in the spine, any kind of novel stimulation, for the spinal cord injury. And then, of course, the continuation of RPM or, remote patient monitoring. Mm-hmm. Those two were really, really the biggest, or maybe 3 were the biggest, topics that came out outside of AI. In addition to that, they had adjacent technologies, for instance, these tools that face, fewer regulatory hurdles. Those tools really were liked. For instance, wellness devices. They don't have the regulatory path that, to go. So wellness devices were actually a very big part of the medtech, conversation and panel because you could have a first step where you enter as a wellness device, and then the second step will be to go after any kind of, 510K or de novo, et cetera. Sure. So that was another additional thing, to AI.
Right. So it's almost kind of like Gen 2, Gen 3. You're going after more of a formal therapeutic approach, right? So, as we kind of wind down this discussion here today, providing a highlight on the JPMC 43rd Healthcare Conference last week, let's think about it from a SWOT perspective, in particular on the challenges side and the opportunities. Any thoughts there of items that came up during the conference?
So I think from a strength perspective, the medtech industry remains very strong. And yes, the numbers, show that there was some decline, etc., in 2024, but we see some early indicators that are really showing that you're gonna go and hit it, in 2025. And that's why they said, cautiously optimistic, assuming the list of assumptions such as the changes in administration and whatnot. On the weakness side, one thing that people should really, really give some thought to, and from a strategic perspective, is to see, what markets you're in and whether you're good in that market. And sometimes you have to shrink, and sometimes you may have to grow. One thing that came, from a weakness, specifically, being an entrepreneur myself, is that we are sometimes too perfectionist, right? We want to do everything, the whole world, etc., from the bottom all the way up, and we can't invent chips, right? So we have to buy the chips. So that's one loss right there. But there was an emphasis, specifically in partnerships. We should not try to do everything because time to market is of the essence. And then so because time to market is of the essence, then therefore you need to partner up with others and really network and position yourself to either license the technology in-house or, out license it, but also, sign up deals with strategic partners, distributors and whatnot, because you're not going to be able to do it yourself. And ultimately the value of your product is in a very specific niche, and the rest has been kind of invented. So use that, momentum and use that network of individuals and companies to, generate, revenue, but also early traction and time to accelerate time to market.
Hey, Peman, I think the feedback you've shared with us from your experience at the JP Morgan Chase Healthcare Conference last week has been really insightful. But I got to say, and perhaps selfishly, being a business owner myself, best thing I heard from what you shared was that there's some optimism. Seems like there's a good wind of optimism as we're kind of getting into the new year here. So if anything, even if that may be a little speculative, I'll take it. So any final thoughts here as we kind of close up just on your experience or your takeaways from the conference?
I think, specifically, coming from a startup, background here in Orange County, certainly the biggest takeaway from the conference is that there is hope and we should plan for it. And there is this wave, if things go down at some point, they're going to come up again. This wave is starting right now as we speak. And we want to be on top of that wave. So if we're doing raise, if we're doing any kind of connections, we're doing, a seed round, Series A, whatnot, we have to be on that wave right now because, 1 to 2 years down the road is going to be too late. The wave would have already taken off.